Hello and welcome to DTV, television for and by Democrats. My name is Renee Hoyos, and I'll be your host this evening. It's been about a year since our nation's capital was stormed by pro-Trump supporters attempting to overturn the 2020 election results. 5 people died in the event, and countless others were injured. It was a revealing moment, demonstrating Republicans were so committed to the lie that the election had been stolen that they were willing to steal it themselves. Tonight, we look back on that attack with a program that we aired shortly after the incident, featuring the late John Stewart and his wife Nancy, as they reflected on what the Capitol meant to them and what was trampled on January 6, 2021. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight for Democratic Television. Tonight, we have the honor of special guests, John and Nancy Stewart. These two are our very own Democratic Party treasures, and between the two of them have vast experience at the federal government, working for senators, House members, and the National Democratic Party at the Capitol. Tonight, we are going to talk about our nation's capital, simply referred to as the Capitol, the shining beacon on the hill. Many Americans will live their whole lives never having the opportunity to walk the halls of the Capitol and look at the many sculptures, paintings, and architecture. Tonight's guests have very fond memories of that building, and we're so lucky to have them on tonight to share those memories and their thoughts about last week's events. Welcome to the show, Nancy and John Stewart. I gather that you both were literally in tears watching the desecration of the Capitol, and I'm curious at what caused that sort of emotional reaction.
Thanks, Renee. That's accurate. We were in tears.
So true.
We were in tears because the Capitol means so much to us personally, in terms of our lives that we've lived together. And we'll talk about some of that as we get into this program, but also what the Capitol represents in terms of this country. I love this country. I care about this country. And our country is captured in the Capitol because it represents the entire sweep of our nation. It has been built and rebuilt and expanded and upgraded and fixed and changed all through the 240 years or whatever it is of our nation. And so it truly represents America. And so when the people trash the Capitol, they're trashing America. We love America, and we just couldn't keep from crying because it was so awful to see this, so mindless, so irresponsible, and I just thought it was in time to talk a little bit about the Capitol, why it's so special, and why hopefully at some point in the future, everyone who's watching this show will get a chance to be there. Right now, even if you were in Washington, you couldn't get into the building because it's shut off because of those terrorists, those goons, those thugs that were there last week. But that will eventually change, and hopefully when it does, everyone will have a chance to go and see what Nancy and I are talking about.
We used to live in various apartments, and we finally bought a house right on Capitol Hill. And our first 2 apartments, anyway, we could practically see the Capitol from our door. And I worked on the Hill for a while, and then when our children came along, we were still living there on the Hill, and I would push the children in a stroller and go up to the Capitol grounds because it was a beautiful park-like area. And when John was working there, we'd go in and visit him in his office, stroller and all. It was just a warm, open place, and it's changed.
We had a German Shepherd by the name of Alexander, and every morning we lived about 8 blocks from the Capitol. Alexander and I would walk up to the Capitol. I'd take him off the leash, and he would just take off across those Capitol grounds. It was the greatest thing for Alexander, and I just stood there and watched it, and then sort of saying a silent prayer. Hopefully Alexander won't get any wild ideas to just take off. But he always came back. Yeah. But it was on the Capitol grounds where this occurred. It was just wonderful. So let me tell you a little bit about the Capitol, and Nancy can chime in as we go. But there is Every nook and cranny in that building has a story to tell. It really does. There's the old Supreme Court chamber that housed the Supreme Court before they're in their present building. But before it was the old Supreme Court chamber, it was the original chamber of the US Senate. And so it has a grand history, this one room, and it has been redecorated to represent what it looked like in those days, 200 or so years ago. And if you walk onto the other side of the building, the Capitol, you come to Statuary Hall. And there are a lot of pictures of terrorists, insurrectionists walking through Statuary Hall on the TV this week. And it's the old House of Representatives chamber, the one that they were in before they're in the one they're in now. And the thing about Statuary Hall that is so wonderful, it has a little plaque right in the middle of the room, and it's called the whispering spot, because if you stand there, you can hear everything that is going on all over this fairly good-sized room, even if they're talking in a whisper. And legend has it that John Quincy Adams, after he was president, he returned to the House of Representatives and served there for like 40 years after he was president. And he would sit at his desk and he would be listening to hear what all the people were saying all over the room. And so it's now been marked with a plaque. And so back in the old days when they had guides, they would always see a tour. They'd be all clustered around the whispering spot, and the guide would be off in the corner whispering. And everybody would say, you could hear that. You could hear it. And it's just filled with things like that. There are little known staircases. There are corridors. There are passageways under the Capitol. There's a whole world under the Capitol, which when you're there long enough, you get to figure out. And I eventually got to figure it out, so I didn't get lost. And then, of course, there are thousands of artifacts, clocks, paintings, statues, busts, all throughout the Capitol, particularly in Statuary Hall. Every state has 2 statues in Statuary Hall. And so it's like a museum. It's a living museum, but it's also a working building. I mean, the legislature of the United States of America is working there all the while. So it's very exciting. We were very, very lucky to be there at a time when you could just walk in. I mean, you just walked in the door. There were no magnetometers. There were no police checking you. You just walked in, and I spent a lot of time there and got to know it pretty well. So, Renee, in getting ready for this TV, you talked about some of your experiences as a young person in the Capitol. What were they?
This is an enormous country, and not everybody can get the opportunity to come look at our nation's capital. It's a long way from California. But my brother was the legislative correspondent for Senator Barbara Boxer.
Wow.
And we went to see him in his suit. Now, my brother was a hippie, but he had to wear a suit, and we didn't recognize him. Seriously, we walked by him. He cut his hair off because, you have a lot of dress requirements. It is not trivial to go to the Capitol or to work in the Capitol. And so there were a few things that he had to do. He had to always wear a suit. You always have to wear a jacket. And, you have to be pretty much cleaned up. You have to have a tie. And so he was able to provide a Capitol tour by a staffer, which makes it kind of a special tour. Usually it's not just the guide. It was actually a staffer. And we saw Strom Thurmond being held up by several aides, because he was in his 90s, I think, when we saw him. And I saw Joe Kennedy speak on the Senate floor. So there's all these, but what I do remember about it was Senator Joe Kennedy. What I do remember about it was that it is a highly ornate and beautiful place, and every square inch has some history in it. There's a statue, there's a picture, or there's, the guides all know that on this staircase, thus and such happened. Over there between those two offices, thus. So it's just steeped with history.
Yeah.
And it'd be great if we could all go see it, because you would appreciate it more if you saw it up close.
Particularly if Nancy and I and you were their guides. They would get a great tour if we did that.
Oh, yeah. We got all the inside scoop. And of course, I was not savvy about the other senators. So it was like pointing out celebrities. It's like, oh, there's Senator so-and-so, there's Senator so-and-so, and oh, there's Representative Blah, and then, gossip. And of course, but that was, it was exciting. And I think if you don't have a connection to a place, then it doesn't mean as much to you. And I think for the people that took over or tried to take over the Capitol, the place didn't have any value to them.
Oh, they demonstrated that. One of the most beautiful areas of the Capitol, the ground floor on the Senate side of the Capitol, had these beautiful corridors that were decorated by the Italian fresco artist Brumidi. And he spent 25 years of his life decorating those halls with some of the most exquisite paintings you'll ever imagine. And they relate to there were different rooms, and there was then a Foreign Relations Committee room was in the Capitol in those days. So he had a fresco of overseas, and then there was the agriculture room, and he had a fresco of American farmer and farming land. And it's just, and these frescoes have been preserved. They are magnificent. That's just a small sliver of the artwork in the corridors of the Senate side. They don't exist on the House side. So we have that one special thing, I will say, that was always great for us is there was a big, huge painting of the signing of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And there's pictures of all the delegates to the Constitutional Convention in this picture. And there is a key that identifies each one of these delegates, who it was. And George Washington is very prominent, and Benjamin Franklin is very prominent. One of my ancestors was Nicholas Gilman. Gilman is my middle name. He was a delegate to the convention from New Hampshire. He was the last delegate to arrive. He finally got there in July of 1787. After all the work had been done, Nicholas Gilman staggered into the assembly. And so the artist who painting this magnificent big painting took that into account. And there's this little head. You see, it's just this tiny little head. Those of you who see the picture on the screen, they're two delegates with their arms outstretched. And underneath those arms, if you look very closely, you will see just a little head. That's ancestor Nicholas Gilman. And so he obviously was not a factor of great note in the convention, but at least he was there.
He got
there.
He got
right. Well, no credit for showing up for the ribbon cutting, huh?
So anyway, we say all this because as we go back in these memories, that it was so excruciating to watch what happened last week. I want Nancy to join in on this, but one of the fondest, we've been married 63, almost 64 years now. And one of the fondest memories of our married life was on January 19th, 1961. If you think about that, that's the evening before the inauguration of John F. Kennedy on January 20th, 1961. That afternoon and evening, it snowed in Washington. And did it snow? It snowed and snowed. And so we lived just 2 blocks away. So we finally said, let's go on over and see what is happening. How are they going to do this? So we walked over to the Capitol, and there's snow everywhere. They have all these benches set up and everything. They're all covered with snow. Everything's covered. I mean, like a half a foot of snow. More, maybe 8 inches. I mean, it was a lot of snow. And so we go out on the West Terrace. Now, those of you who saw the pictures from last week, the one major entry point that the thugs and goons and terrorists used was through the West Terrace. It's what faces the Washington Monument. And so Nancy and I are back there on the West Terrace around 10 o'clock on the evening of January 19th, and we had one robust snowball fight. I'm telling you, Nancy thinks she won. I think I won.
I did.
I think I won. But we said, how are they going to have the inauguration tomorrow in a blizzard, for crying out loud? But, you know, they worked all night. They got snow blowers and they did everything. And fortunately, it stopped snowing. And on the 20th, the sun was out. It was a bright, crystal clear day. And it was frigid. We had tickets where we had to stand on the Capitol, the House steps to watch. We didn't have seats. We had to stand on the House steps. We needed tickets even to get there to watch the inauguration. And the temperature fluctuated between 6 and 8 degrees. And we just about damn near froze to death, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Was it worth it?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, that's
when Robert Frost was reading his poem and he had trouble seeing it because there was a little bit of wind and it was so cold, and poor fellow struggled. So, and then of course we heard John Kennedy give his "Ask Not What Your Country Can Do for You" speech. That was that one. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was definitely worth it.
Well, when Robert Frost couldn't read what he'd written, he recited one of his poems.
Yes, he recited it
from memory.
Yeah,
and you know, we were so young. I mean, we were young, honest to God. Once we were, and that was this is 1961, and we were so excited to be there. And it was just a great. These are the kind of memories that you carry with you for the whole time.
Yeah. I think, you know, being steeped in all of that history and that reverence to see what played out on January 6th must have been
just sickening,
pretty disturbing.
One last crazy story, and I'll shut up. In 1964, a bunch of us are writing speeches for Hubert Humphrey's vice presidential campaign. He was running for vice president of the United States with Lyndon Johnson. Johnson for president, Humphrey for vice president. And 6 of us were sequestered over in the east front of the Capitol. They had extended the east front, and there were some new rooms. And so we were able to access one of those rooms and borrow it from another senator. And so that's where we worked. Now, it's against the law to do that today, but it wasn't in 1964. So we're over there, and one day we had a very, very heavy day, and it was 2 a.m., and we were still working over there. And I finally just said, all right, folks, enough is enough. Let's do something other than sit here and write stuff. Let's go down to the rotunda and play touch football. And they said, what, are you crazy? I said, no, I'm not. Let's go. We had a football. I said, we're going down to the rotunda and play touch football. And so we did. We went down to the rotunda and we played touch football at 2 a.m. in the rotunda of the Capitol. And 2 Capitol cops came by and they looked at us and they said, what are you doing? I said, we're playing touch football. And they said, well, isn't that interesting? And so then they watched, and after a while, they started cheering. That was the atmosphere that existed in those days. And I say, I will bet you that very few people can say they played touch football at 2 a.m. in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. That is a small group of people.
Yes, I think that is a very select group. You know, it occurs to me that the stories you're talking about, that over time, the Capitol has been closed up to the public. I think there's a fence around the field that you ran your dog in.
Yeah.
Over time, they've required all of us to walk through metal detectors and to be wanded. If you're a stranger, I recall trying to get into the Capitol and have to go through a lot of security. And now, what little freedom that people had is now going to be taken away. I remember that I watched members of Congress and their staff. They were able to walk around all of those, all of the security because they had a badge. And now I think they're probably not going to allow that to happen. So Congress people will have to, and their staffs will have to stand in line to get into the building these days. And then to get into the chamber itself, now they're going to erect. So now, this mob fighting for freedom and liberty has just removed all of that from our nation's capital. And, a few people ruined it for the rest of us, which seems to be the way it's going these days.
During the debate of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I was working with Senator Humphrey, and he was the floor manager of this historic legislation. So I spent hours, days on the Senate floor with him, and to see those thugs running down and some jackass sitting in the chair of the presiding officer of the Senate was just awful. So anyway, with all of these memories that we have and the affection that we have for the building as a symbol of our democracy, it was as though a bunch of thugs had broken into our home and were running through our home, trashing it. That is the feeling that we had. That's when we cried. And it was a very, very, very sad, distressing moment. And you just hope that we can somehow, some way, it'll take many years, but to work our way back out of this mess that we find ourselves in today. And there'll be that the people's house, which is how the Capitol is often referred to, can become the people's house once again. Mm-hmm. That people can go and see the Capitol, learn the history of the Capitol, learn the history of our democracy and our republic, and take real pride in that. That's what we need to hope for and work for, because that will be a wonderful day once again in America. But that's what we need to work for. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for your memories. They're so important now because I'm afraid that young people will see this is how you behave in the Capitol without having any other experience to compare it to. Mm-hmm. And so I really appreciate you both taking your time today from your busy schedules to share with us the photos and the memories that you have of the Capitol. They're precious, and I hope that we can really get this show out so that people can see that, yes, this is our building, and people who, thugs and criminals broke in and burglarized it, and their fates are yet to be revealed, along with any who aided and abetted them.
And they murdered people. That is exactly right.
They murdered people. And it was a coup that we don't see in this country, an attempted. We see this in other countries, and we always say it's them, but it is also us. And so I think we need to realize that we're in real serious time right now. Yeah. And that, democracy is going to depend on what each and every one of us does to protect it. So.
And this affection and this love for our country is not a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. It's an American thing. And I just hope that everybody at some point in their lives can be in the Capitol and understand why it is so important to us and why it is so important to our nation. It is a symbol of our nation. It should be respected and honored, and it was not last week. And that is a great tragedy, a real tragedy. One of the worst things that's ever happened, The British burned it in 1814, and then we had this disgraceful performance last week. May it never happen again, and may we rebuild and come back from that and come back stronger than ever. That's what I'm gonna prepare to work for as long as ever, however much longer I'm around. So, Renee, you're great, and I thank you so much for talking with us on this. This has been a real treat.
Since last year, over 700 people have been charged for participating in the attack. A House committee has been convened, and multiple Trump administration officials have been ordered to testify about their role in the planning of the failed insurrection. And some have been held in contempt for refusing. The fallout from January 6th continues to unfold. Public hearings are set to begin soon, and we'll have a clear picture of the organizers behind this event. The hope is that in the end, this will just be an unusual historical footnote and not a sign of what's to come. Stay involved and vote, and we'll see you next time on DTV.
You got a good story on Watergate.
Yeah, you do have a great story on Watergate that needs to be told, but I think it's so interesting that all that crime, sort of happened underground, and, people really weren't making all the right connections. But here, I mean, imagine that if the Watergate burglary happened now, do you think those burglars would have posted on Facebook?
No, I don't think so.
I mean, do you think they would have been like, here's me storming the Democratic Party headquarters, click, share. No. I mean, it is such a different time right now.
I was working at the Democratic National Committee during Watergate, and it was my office that the burglars broke into. And Nancy and I got a call from my secretary, who had been called by the DC police, saying that our office had been broken into by 6 burglars. And what did we do?
Didn't they catch them?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They caught him.
They caught him in your office, right?
And so, so what a shock that was. I mean, and it was from that moment, that precise moment, a little over 2 years later, that Richard Nixon resigned because of all of that. That was the beginning of the fall of Richard Nixon, when that phone rang in our bedroom.
I think it's an interesting story. I mean, really, because it's. I was 7 during the hearings, so and I'm approaching 60. So there's a generation that really doesn't understand the significance of Watergate.
No.
And I think, unfortunately, Watergate has made things like Iran-Contra and what happened and made Donald Trump permissible. Honestly, to compare as well, the response of the 2nd Congressional District Representative at the time, who was Howard Baker Jr., and the response to our current representative, the seditionist and traitor Tim Burchett.
There are no depths to which Burchett will not sink.
No, there aren't. Did you